joining us today for excelling in the interview process. Before we get started, just want to let you all know a couple of things. You can ask questions, and I encourage you to ask questions. So on the your dashboard that will have popped up with the GoToWebinar program, at the bottom there's a chat box, and you can type your question into that chat box, and then just use the drop-down and select Send to Staff. That will send the question directly to me, Annie White, and I will go ahead and hold on to that question and periodically interject to ask our presenter what she thinks about your question and what she might advise. So just want to put that out there. Also, you will receive a recording of this webinar tomorrow, along with a copy of the slides. There's a few slides in there with some extra information, and Michelle was gracious enough to agree to let them be sent out. So just to let you know those two things. But you know, again, we're here to talk about interviewing, and it's such an important thing, and I know a lot of people are getting ready for a brand new year, new career, and kicking off their job search, and this interview process will certainly be a part of that. So we're very happy today to have Michelle Antonio. She is a Booth alumna, be our presenter today. She has a private career coaching and consulting business in the Philadelphia area, but prior to that, she was, you know, part of the big consulting world and worked with a lot of great competitive people, and she was even part of the recruiting at Bain and Deloitte, and then moved on to Wharton to manage the MBA career management team there, helping lots of great MBA candidates move on in their job search and interview into successful positions. And after that, she went on to open up her private consulting and coaching business, which I mentioned is based in Philadelphia. Michelle has been a presenter for us before on the webinar series in January. She kicked us off in 2012 with a presentation on resumes. So if you haven't checked that out, please do. You can find that at mindonline.uchicago.edu. She's also been a featured presenter 2 years in a row at our Philadelphia Career Month event. We're so happy to have her back again to talk about the interview process. So again, send your questions in the chat box at the bottom and click Send to Staff, and you will receive a recording of this along with the slides. So please sit back and enjoy. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Michelle.
All right, thank you so much, Annie. Hi, everyone. And as Annie said, my name is Michelle Antonio, and it is really a pleasure for me to be here today to share insights and advice on a topic that, as a former recruiter and frequent interviewer, is very near and dear to my heart, which is how to excel as an interview candidate. As Annie mentioned, and as you can see from my background, okay, hold on a second. Annie, I'm trying to advance the slide. It doesn't look like it's advancing. Have I lost control of the Can you hear me, Annie?
I can hear you. Let me see. Let me try and give you back control if you lost it. But I have you listed as a presenter still. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, hold on. Okay, there we go.
Oh, there
now it's moving. Perfect. Okay, sorry. So as Annie mentioned, and as you can see from my background, I have spent most of my career in the recruiting and career management field, and 7 years of that was actually at the Wharton School, where when I was the director of career management, I had this unique opportunity to really speak to dozens of employers across a diverse set of industries to really understand what is it that they valued in candidates for a variety of different roles, and where they typically saw candidates stumble and where they saw them shine in the interview process. So it's really that perspective coupled with my 4 years as a recruiter, where I myself interviewed candidates and saw firsthand how interview teams make decisions. That's the source of the perspective and insights I hope to share with you guys today. So what I hope that we'll accomplish in today's session is first to share some of this employer perspective that I've mentioned in terms of what they're looking for when they interview you. Next, provide you with a framework and best practices for preparing for your interviews, including how to answer the very important but often dreaded tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume question. Also want to spend a little bit of time discussing strategies for answering those tough interview questions that you should expect to get. And lastly, highlight some interview resources that you can take advantage of as you prepare for any upcoming interviews. So what do employers really want to learn about you in the interview? In a nutshell, regardless of whether you are a recent graduate or you're an experienced candidate or you're a career switcher, employers are going to want to advance those candidates or extend offers to those candidates who they think are the most effective at addressing the following 3 key questions. And you can think of these questions as being part of a funnel or filtering process where the interviewer first wants to assess, can you do the job? And this means both in terms of hard technical skills as well as soft skills like leadership, interpersonal, or teamwork skills. And this is often initially assessed through the resume, but what they're looking for in the interview is a clear articulation of some concrete examples or proof that you have the skills that you've listed on your resume. Now, assuming that you can convince the interviewer that you're capable to do the job, they then want to know, are you a fit for the job? And being a fit is not just about having the qualifications or the training to do the job. It's also about, are you a good fit for the culture of the organization and for the current and future challenges of the role? Meaning, do you seem like someone who can not only handle what's required today in the job, but that you can grow into the role that they need you, that it will become in the future? So this is really your opportunity to convince them of your fit through your responses to the behavioral-based questions, which we'll get to in a few minutes, and your ability to reveal your personality and work style. Lastly, employers want to know, do you want the job? Because at the end of the day, when it comes down to deciding between multiple candidates who can do the job and are a fit for the job, employers want to hire the candidate who has convinced them of their genuine passion and motivation to join their particular company in this specific role, and they want to select the candidate who they think is likely to accept the offer, even if they were to receive competitive offers, at other companies. As I often tell my clients, companies don't get any bonus points for extending an offer to someone who is the most qualified candidate if they're not actually going to accept the job. So while it may seem obvious to you that you want the job, otherwise you wouldn't be interviewing for it, the truth is that employers want to be reassured throughout the process that you really do want this job, as it's going to make them more excited to actually extend you the offer. Now, depending on what type of candidate you are, and we'll go through this in a minute, and how competitive the candidate pool is, the weighting of these three questions is going to be a little bit different, and I've sort of outlined them here in the chart. So career switchers, or those of you who may be thinking about changing industries or changing functions, or on-rampers, which is a term I use for candidates who are returning to the workforce or trying to return to the workforce after an extended absence from the workforce, often ask me how important is it to have direct experience in whatever the industry or the field is. And really the answer depends on how highly specialized the role is and if a very unique set of skills is required. Clearly, if the role requires highly specialized knowledge in a very narrow field, then direct experience is going to be more heavily weighted. However, as a warning to experienced candidates, I want to make sure that you don't rest on your laurels of just having direct experience, because employers are also evaluating candidates in terms of their enthusiasm and their capabilities to grow within the role. So they want to be convinced that you're not just interviewing for this job because it's the easiest thing for you to do. It's sort of like your default option, which frankly in this economy there are a lot of candidates who are just doing that in a tough economy. And this is where a career switcher or someone with less experience can actually often convey a higher level of enthusiasm or commitment to the career path. So you want to be aware of that on either side of which type of candidate you are. In terms of fit, the more senior or longer-term leadership responsibilities that the role has, the more important it is that you demonstrate that you have this fit in terms of leadership skills and style that are embraced in that particular organization, since they're looking to hire you not only as a business leader or as leader of the organization, but a role model for those that report to you. So this is why it's critical as a career switcher that you have invested in research and networking so you can articulate your knowledge and understanding of what it will take to succeed in that particular industry and organization. Ultimately, as we said in the last slide, being able to convince the employer that you really want the job is oftentimes the deciding factor amongst final candidates. And the reason is because conveying passion and enthusiasm implies a degree of scrappiness and willingness to learn and fill any skill gaps that exist to be successful. And as we said before, it makes you a much more appealing candidate because it feels like the probability of your acceptance will be high. So this is why it's so important throughout the interview that you continuously articulate and remind the interviewer why you're a great candidate and that you're excited about the role. And we'll talk about how to make this more explicit connection between your responses and why you're a great fit for the role in upcoming slides. Okay, so let's continue to build on this idea about how you create more effective interview responses. In addition to making sure your responses are focused on answering one of those three key questions, you also want to make sure that your answers are relevant. In order to prove that that you have what it takes to be successful, you want to create a targeted sales message that promotes your unique and relevant combination of, let's say, 3 to 4 skills and personality traits that you think you can bring to the role. It's important that you select skills and qualities about yourself that are valued for the role and that you not only focus on hard skills, but also where is the source of your passion or motivation or interest in the job. Because again, as an interviewer, I want to know that you're not only capable of doing the job, but that you're going to enjoy doing this day in and day out. I usually advise my clients to focus only on like the top 3 or 4 skills and attributes, because any more than that becomes difficult for the interviewer or for you to remember, and it just dilutes sort of the power and the focus of your sales message. You can also make your interview responses more relevant by what we talked about earlier, explicitly linking your response or the example you're giving to why this makes you a strong candidate or a great fit for the role of the company. So for example, if you're describing what you enjoyed most about working at your previous employer, and it's an aspect that attracts you to this new company that you're interviewing with, then you should say something explicit like, one of the things I enjoyed the most about working at my previous company was the entrepreneurial culture where employees were allowed to make, their own decisions and were held accountable to those decisions. And that's one of the main reasons I'm attracted to your company and why I believe I would really thrive in the XYZ role. So you want to be on the active lookout for opportunities like this to explicitly link your answers and how they highlight something about, why you'd be a strong candidate or why you're so attracted to the role. The second characteristic that you want to make sure your answers are is that they're memorable. And this is best done by preparing 2 to 3 examples of success stories for each skill or quality in your sales message, which prove that you actually possess the skills and personal qualities that you say you have. And then, you can weave these examples then into your interview responses, which will help reinforce your sales message. So, for example, if one of the components of your sales message is that, say, you're a creative problem solver, you can use one of your success stories where you, let's say, came up with a creative solution to a problem to answer an interview question that on the surface may seem like it has nothing to do with creative problem solving. So, for example, you could be asked, tell me about a time when you had to work with a difficult person. And you can show how your creative thinking or problem solving allowed you to develop a solution to a problem that impressed this difficult person and eventually allowed you to earn their respect, thus answering the question you've been asked while simultaneously reinforcing your sales message. So that's sort of the strategy is, develop those key sales points, come up with some examples that reinforce them, and then weave them into your interview responses. Another way that you make sure that your responses are more memorable is to deliver them, which means preparing them this way using what we call the SAR or CAR framework, which many of you may be familiar with, which essentially means communicating the example in this format of outlining the situation or the problem that you were facing, the actions that you then took to address that situation or problem, and then the specific results or impact that you achieved with your actions. Telling specific stories with contextual detail makes your experience come much more to life and is going to be a lot easier to remember than just speaking in broad generalities about your skills and experience. As an interviewer, I'm going to be much more likely to remember you as, hey, that was the candidate who, was successful in doubling, sales in his region that was under competitive attack with these, really creative social media marketing ideas, than just, remembering, oh, that's the candidate who said they were really strong, they had really extensive marketing skills, but without offering any concrete proof or example. So try to be more specific as opposed to just speaking in generalities. And, the last thing I would say is you want to try to keep your answers concise, focusing only on the minimum content that is needed for the interviewer to understand, the example you're giving, with the goal of keeping your responses to 1 to 2 minutes long. The one exception to this would be the walk me through your resume question, which we'll talk about shortly, where the answer may justifiably be 2 to 3 minutes long if the content is relevant. You also want to make sure that you make regular direct eye contact with your interviewer, not only because it conveys that you're actively engaged in the process, but also because it allows you to observe cues from the interview about the depth and the pace of your responses. If you see the interviewer looking off into the distance like they're bored or like they're crinkling their eyebrows, your answer is probably getting too long or they are having trouble following your storyline, so you'll want to adjust your answers accordingly, or perhaps say, would it help for me to clarify that, or does that make sense? Okay, so the next part I want to move into now is just really breaking down the key components of an interview. And in a successful interview, you ideally are going to excel in each of these components, and then these components are going to come together to form this holistic picture, or puzzle, as I've illustrated here, of you as a compelling candidate. And so over the next several slides, we'll break down each of these components and talk about what the interview is assessing in each component and what you as a candidate should be focused on communicating. So the first component of any interview is the opening, where you are potentially greeting the receptionist or the recruiter and then introducing yourself to the interviewer for the first time before you actually sit down and begin the formal line of questioning. So you want to remember that the evaluation process starts definitely before the official interview begins, especially around fit and personality. So you want to be the consummate professional in terms of being on time for the interview, how you dress, how you treat any employees that you encounter, and even other interview candidates you may encounter who are interviewing in the office that day. The important thing to remember here is that you only get one chance to make a first impression, so it's worth planning ahead and preparing to make it as positive as possible. The strategy here is what I call control the controllable. So plan to arrive, I'd say 20 to 30 minutes early, with the goal of actually arriving at the interview site 15 minutes early, because you can always hang out in the parking lot or at a local coffee shop if you get there too early. But if you find yourself running late or getting lost, or maybe the directions were not clear, the stress from potentially being late can have a negative ripple effect on your composure for the entire interview. So make sure you plan accordingly. You also want to make sure that you're dressed appropriately but comfortably. Now is not the time for you to break in for the first time like a new suit or a new set of shoes that you've never worn, and to realize that something doesn't fit right. That's going to be distracting. You also want to make sure that you're conveying positive facial expressions and that you've practiced your firm but not hand-crushing handshake, and that you have one or two questions or comments teed up that you can use as small talk as you're walking to the interview room, so that you don't come across as like a nervous or unconfident candidate, but rather you want to come across as professional, enthusiastic, and easy to talk to. Okay, another key aspect of the interview is what I call the technical assessment, which is where the interviewer is measuring your industry and role-specific know-how as an indicator of both your level of expertise and your commitment and interest in the position. Your strategy here is to make it as easy for them as possible to visualize you in the role, so that they have confidence that you're not going to need a burdensome amount of training, or that you're not going to have to overcome a really steep learning curve to begin to contribute in the role. And this is why, for career switchers in particular, you want to avoid any voluntary references to what you don't have or what you can't bring or what you don't know about the job. This is not to say that you should lie or misrepresent your experience, but it means not weakening your own candidacy by reminding employers actively what you don't have. I can't tell you how many times I have, in mock interviews or practice interviews with candidates, they say things like, although I lack direct industry experience in X, or, well, I haven't done this type of role before, blank, blank, blank. We don't want to use language like that, because it's just highlighting what you don't have. And instead, you want to focus on what you do bring to the table and how your experiences are relevant and applicable in many ways. So, like I said before, oftentimes people will start their answers with these weakening phrases, and then I wasn't even thinking about it as a weakness, but now that they pointed it out, I start thinking the candidate must be really self-conscious about it, which means it probably really is a bigger weakness than I think it is, and so you don't want to undermine your candidacy that way. You should also prepare for questions around how you would approach common job scenarios that are typical for the role you're interviewing for. Things like your leadership style or how you deal with certain, uncertainty or conflict. And again, if you can pull from comparable examples from your past and show how they're related to the new job, you will be effectively answering the, can you do the job and are you a fit for the job, since you'll be showing that you've dealt with these types of situations before, even if it was in a different setting or a different context. So it's really showing you do have relevant experience and aptitude to be successful in the new role. Now let's discuss what I call the fit and behavioral assessment of the interview. The key tenet of employers asking what we call these behavioral-based or fit questions is this notion of past performance or past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior or performance. And it often shows up and is first presented as, tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume. And what the interviewer is really looking for is to see that throughout your educational and professional history, you've made choices, decisions, and achieved accomplishments that are consistent with someone who possesses the skills and the personality attributes to be successful in this job, particularly in the context of the culture of their particular company. So in your interview responses to these types of questions, the key is to use past examples or experiences that demonstrate your capabilities and fit with the job, as well as the company culture, so that in this regard, employers can really, get a positive response to all three of the key questions, that you can do the job, you're a fit for the job, and that I hear responses that make me believe that you truly understand what this job is about, yet you're still very excited about it. And then just as importantly, you want to explicitly connect your response to how this makes you a strong candidate for the role. So for example, let's say you're interviewing for a product manager role and you're responding to a question, tell me about a time you had to lead a team to overcome a difficult challenge. At the end of your situation, action, result story, you could wrap up your response with how this experience taught you a valuable lesson on the importance of creating buy-in across the team, and that you know that you'll need to apply this skill for the role that you're interviewing for, because you know that working effectively in cross-functional teams is important to the success of the role. So being that direct and explicit is important in proving that you know what it takes to be successful in the role, and that you connect the dots for the interviewer, as opposed to forcing them to use extra brain power to connect those dots for themselves. And that's what's really going to help them remember that you're someone that's a great fit for the job. Okay, let's talk a little bit more in detail about what one of the more important questions that's likely to come up in an interview, which is this "tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume" question. And I would say that regardless of whether or not this question is actually asked of you directly, you should always be prepared to deliver the answer, because your preparation for this question actually prepares you to articulate the core arguments for why you are a compelling candidate for the role, which is something you should be articulating throughout the interview anyway. A question I often get is, are these two questions asking the same thing, or are they different questions? So I would say yes, in that they're the same, and that the objectives are the same, which is to demonstrate that you have both the industry or functional knowledge to do the job and the fit and interpersonal skills to excel in the position. But they are different in terms of how you can structure your response. Walk me through your resume implies that the interviewer wants to hear a chronological, or what I call a bottom-up approach to your storytelling, because you build up your story starting from things that happened in the past and show how that influenced your future decisions and actions. Whereas "tell me about yourself," in my mind, gives you more flexibility to deviate from chronological storytelling and allows you to more readily highlight your key sales message first. In other words, what are the main things that I want you to know about me? And I'm going to give you some examples from my resume that prove that, which may or may not be in pure chronological order. And that's what I call more of a top-down storytelling method. So personally, as an interviewer, I personally prefer to ask and to hear the answer to "tell me about yourself," because I think it's easier as a listener to be anchored to, what are the key themes or the key skills or the key qualities that I'm going to hear about, and that sort of serves as a roadmap as I hear the rest of your response, and I get more detail on certain events and decisions that support kind of those key themes. But even if you get asked, walking through your resume, you can certainly still start your response by orienting the interviewer to what are the key themes or messages you want them to anchor on, and then walk through your experience and decisions chronologically, pointing out how they support these key themes and messages that you highlighted at the beginning.
Now, Michelle, really quick question.
Yes.
So where do you start with the "tell me about yourself" or the "walk me through your resume"? How far back do you go?
That's a great question. I get that question a lot, and I think it's really going to vary case by case. I definitely do not think that anyone should feel compelled, like you must always start at point X. I mean, I think sometimes people feel like I have to start with my undergraduate, college, experience, or do I have to start with the first job? So you certainly shouldn't feel constrained that way. But I think it's starting at the point where the experience or the choice or the decision to, whatever it's school or a job, like where is the best place for you to start telling your story, right? So if I don't know, you're applying for a job that's highly technical in nature and you were an engineer as an undergraduate, then it may make sense to start as far back as college, because that's the beginning of where you started to demonstrate or show that you had this interest in sort of highly analytical and quantitative work. But if it's not, then start at whatever point is going to be like the best starting point to kind of introduce your key themes and messaging. I definitely would say that this goes back to sort of the resume writing piece, which is in general you want to try to not have things on your resume that you don't want to talk about. Now clearly there are some things that you can't. You're not going to be able to hide, like where you went to school. That would look strange if you didn't have any educational experience. But again, ideally you're going to start at a point where it begins to help you unfold the story that you're trying to tell about your skills and your personality and what you really enjoy. So hopefully does that answer the question?
That was perfect. Thank you.
Sure. So as we were saying, I wanted to talk about what is the interviewer really assessing in your response to this tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume question. First and foremost, your level of preparedness, because this is such a standard and expected question that they certainly expect all candidates to have taken the time to prepare for it. Next, as we said before, the goal of your response is to reveal not only the what of your past choices and decisions, but more importantly, the why. So kind of what we were just talking about. Why did you go to the school that you did? Or why did you choose the major that you did? Or why did you choose the job that you chose, after college? What is it that you loved about them, and why did you decide to leave them? As well as, your key accomplishments along the way. And the reason is because revealing the why and like what I learned from this experience or what I liked most about this experience is going to help the interviewer assess if you are a strong candidate for the role, because it's going to reveal if you understand what are the relevant skills for the job and what are the right personality traits you need to have to be good at the job, and do you have the core interests and passions that make you a great match for the role and for the company that you're interviewing for. So, I would have to say the single biggest mistake I see in candidates who answer this question is that they simply just provide like this factual account of like what's on their resume. I went to school here, I majored in this, then I went to this job and had this job title, then I moved on to this job. And they're missing out on the opportunity to proactively show, why they made those choices and how they're a strong match for the job. So what I want to remind people of is that this is the one question that you can almost be guaranteed to get at the beginning of every interview, and you get to completely control the answer. So don't miss the opportunity to establish the strength of your candidacy up front in this interview. Like you can't predict which tough questions you're going to get or what, tell me about a time when you did X question. But this is one where you can really control the messaging. So really take the time to think about, what do I want to highlight about my past, and make sure that everything you're saying is reinforcing why you're a great fit for the role. And also remember that what you reveal in your walk me through your resume or tell me about yourself question often serves as a prompt to the interviewer for future questions in the interview. So ideally, you should be selecting examples or accomplishments that you hope the interviewer is going to probe you on later, because you know that this example is something that will further support your sales message or your candidacy. Because again, so that's why you really want to prepare this question well, because it really can serve as the launching point for the rest of the direction of the interview. Okay. Seems like I'm stuck again, Annie. Did you do something magic last time to advance the slide?
There may just be a slight delay.
Okay.
Let me see what I can do here. Is it still not?
It's not responding. Yeah, it's not responding for some reason. If it's
Okay, well, let me, there it is.
Okay, there we go. Maybe there is just a long delay. Okay, so here we go. Now,
we're just keeping everybody on the toes.
There you go. So depending on the type of job seeker or candidate that you are, there's going to be certain questions that I know, when I work with my clients that typically come up that you want to be prepared to answer. And ideally, you want to, proactively address these questions that your interviewer is thinking about in your walking through your resume question, because like I said, they're guaranteed to be thinking about it. So you want to control the messaging around the answer versus leaving it to them to kind of corner you with a tough question about it. So, we're looking at different types of candidates. You could be an involuntary job seeker. You could be a career switcher or an on-ramper. You could be a career progressor, which is what I refer to if you're, trying to sort of stay within the same industry or function that you're already in, or you're a recent graduate. So if you're an involuntary job seeker, someone who didn't necessarily choose to be in job transition, you want to make sure that you present the context of your job search in as positive a manner as possible, focusing on things like, your excitement in having the opportunity to work in a different company like theirs, or to take your career in a new direction, while focusing on the relevant skills you can bring to the role. You definitely want to make sure that you don't come across as defensive or anxious about your situation, even though that may be the case. So this is where practicing your response is really critical. If you're a career switcher or an on-ramper, which you mentioned earlier is someone who's getting back into the workforce after an extended period of time, then you'll want to focus on your transferable skills or skills and activities that you've done that are similar in nature to what you'll do in the new role even if it was in a different context, maybe in volunteer work or extracurricular settings. And you too, like the involuntary job seeker, should address the reason for wanting to make a career change at this point in time. Again, framing it in the most positive way possible versus sounding apologetic or unconfident about your decision to make this change. Don't forget to incorporate any content around why you're so passionate about making the upcoming transition and what draws you to the new function or industry, as this can be a key strength in your candidacy, as we mentioned earlier. As a career progressor or someone who wants to stay within your same field or even within your same company, like maybe you're trying to advance or move laterally within your own organization, you will want to address the motivation for wanting to change companies or roles at this time, or why this new position within your current employer is so appealing to you, again, without sounding overly critical or judgmental about your current situation. And lastly, if you're a recent graduate and are still seeking employment post-graduation, you want to focus on not only your track record of success and transferable skills, but again, also your passion for the industry and the role you're targeting and how you see this as a particularly strong fit given what you know about yourself. The goal is to come across as someone who is focused and selective about what they're looking for versus coming across as, as desperate. You want to reassure them through your confident and well-articulated responses that the reason you're still job seeking is not because of any obvious deficiency in your capabilities, but more a reflection of, let's say, a tough job market, or that you're waiting for the right opportunity to begin what you know is going to be an important next step in your career, so you're being very thoughtful about it. Okay, so how do you construct effective responses to these behavioral questions, such as, tell me about a time when you XYZ? We talked about this earlier, that a winning structure is really this SAR, or situation, action, result storytelling, where you set up a situation or context for the challenge you faced, such as having to turn around, let's say, a declining business, or that you're working with constrained resources, and then the actions that you took or personal attributes that you relied upon to address that situation, and then the positive impact or results that you achieve through your actions. The last secret ingredient in how to close these responses out is something we've been talking about throughout the session, which is how this experience, for example, has taught you something or exemplifies something about you that's going to make you more effective or successful in the new role. Again, we want to be explicit in connecting your response to why this makes you a strong candidate, as this is essential to being a standout and memorable candidate. Some tips for creating effective responses are, make sure you answer the questions being asked. I see this.
Oh, Michelle, we're having some trouble hearing you. Hello? Oh, it sounds like there's a delay or maybe some feedback.
Can you hear me? Annie, I'm getting a message that the audio is having trouble. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly now.
Okay, yeah, it sounded there was a little static on the line. So as I was saying, I often see students or see candidates stumble on this question when they don't answer the right question, like they're so wanting to talk about a particular example that they don't actually answer what's being asked, and so instead they, let's say, talk about a time that they faced a challenging problem when the question was, tell me about a difficult lesson you had to learn. And so then it sounds like they're related, but if you don't actually answer the question that's asked, it sounds like you weren't really listening. You're not a good listener, and you're not actually listening to the question because you don't actually articulate what's the lesson that you learned. You just talk about a difficult situation and how you overcame it. So definitely make sure you listen to the question and that you answer the question that's being asked. Second thing would be, as we said before, tell specific and results-oriented stories and don't just describe generally what you did on the job. Again, reveal motivations and positive character traits in your example so that I can better understand what makes you tick. You also want to establish yourself as someone who has credible growth potential that can add value beyond just the job description duties. And wherever possible, choose examples, like I said, that simultaneously answer the question that's being asked, but also reinforces one of your sales messages in terms of reflecting a skill or a quality that you possess that's going to help you be more effective in the role.
So Michelle, quick question. Someone asked, what do you say when somebody asks you about a skill or experience that you just don't have? How do you turn that around?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it depends on, and this kind of is a good lead into the next slide, which I'm having trouble advancing, so I'll answer the question, and hopefully the delay will catch up, which is, try to think about what they're specifically asking about. Like, what's the core, because maybe they're asking about, like, tell me about a time that you launched a new product or something, and maybe you haven't launched a new product. It's very context specific, but think about what's the deeper meaning behind the question? What do they really want to know? What do they want to be reassured about? And maybe it's about, can you develop like a strategy? Can you figure out what needs to get done in order to make that strategy come to life? And can you be successful? Are you someone that's success-oriented or achievement-oriented or results-oriented? And so maybe you might not have that specific, that exact specific example that they're looking for, but you want to think about what's something that I have that's related to that, right? Can I think about a time that maybe in a community service project or in some other context or setting that wasn't launching a new product, that maybe it was a time that I had to launch an initiative like in my kids' school, the PTA or something, or maybe it's something that in my job which wasn't launching new products, but maybe it was designing a new technology program or something like that, where you can relate what are the comparable skills that they want you to demonstrate. You can translate something that you've done before to kind of address those skills. Does that help answer the question?
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure. So I've been clicking forward and I can't get the slide to advance. So I guess do we just keep waiting for it to? Seems like eventually it'll go, but it's not.
It's not going there yet.
Just trying to think. I mean, I can keep going, and eventually the slide will hopefully catch up.
Do you want me to go ahead? I don't know if I have the most recent version of your presentation, but I can pull mine up, and maybe we can go from there.
Or maybe even do you think if we change the just switch the control back to you? You can't control what's on my screen.
Right. No, I can't.
Okay, or maybe just change back to you and then change back to me. I don't know if maybe that will jostle it back into.
Okay.
Maybe that'll jostle it back to life. Okay. Okay. So I need to advance it now, but control right now, right?
I think you are still.
Okay, so can you see the next slide which says shine through the tough questions?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. That'll work. So the other type of question, which is kind of related to the question we just got, which is a great one, is there's always going to be in the interview some what we call the tough questions, and people often dread them, but it's things like tell me about your 3 greatest weaknesses, or tell me about a failure that you've had and how you dealt with it. And the strategy for answering these questions is really what I just said. It's trying to determine what is the real question behind the question. What is the interviewer really trying to learn about you? In some cases, it's just to see how you react to a stressful situation. But in most cases, what they want is an answer that reveals that you're a reflective person who is humble enough to know that you're not perfect, that you're open to improving yourself, and that you're proactive enough to take steps to do just that. And that's why whenever you get one of these tough questions that forces you to reveal a mistake or a weakness, you want to make sure that you provide content around how you have reflected on the situation and how you plan on or have already taken steps to improve yourself and to prevent this type of issue from happening again. So you always want to be authentic, confident, and truthful in your responses, which is why practicing is so important so that you don't stumble unnecessarily on some of the, like if you have to talk about a mistake or something that was a failure, you don't want to stumble unnecessarily, which makes it sound like you're potentially trying to cover something up or that you lack confidence around learning from your mistakes. And instead, focus on, what were some of the positive skills that you did bring to the situation, and what are the important lessons that you've learned, and also make sure that you don't speak negatively or disparagingly, again, about others. I mean, oftentimes when we're talking about these failures or mistakes, we can have a tendency to start blaming other people or casting blame on other, or putting, saying that it's because of the situation was really tough and there was no way for you to control it. You don't want to sound like you're not holding yourself accountable to the situation, because again, the real question is, are you somebody who, can hold yourself accountable and is humble enough to know that you sometimes do make mistakes. Also see if you can use the tough question to bridge your answer to why you're passionate and interested in the job. So for example, if the question's about, tell me about a time you had to deal with a difficult person, in the workplace, then you might be able to bridge the answer to, eventually to, why it is that you're so attracted to the collaborative culture of this company that you're interviewing with. So, again, look for opportunities to end the, so-called negative question on a positive note. And last but not least, remain composed. If you need to, ask for a moment to structure your thoughts, as it's always better to have, like, a slightly long or awkward pause, but then eventually give a thoughtful answer, than to just quickly deliver like a reactionary answer that may be damaging in some way in content. So over the next 2 slides, I've shared some of the more common tough questions and strategies for answering them. And this is why I said to Annie I wanted to make sure that you guys got a copy of the slides so you could look at them later on. So I encourage you to prepare responses for these questions, because even if you don't get them exactly in this form, I think you're going to find that by preparing for these questions, it'll allow you to answer a broader set of interview questions more effectively. So we won't go through all the individual responses, but some of the examples are, what's your greatest weakness? Or I noticed that you're a career switcher. Why should we hire you over someone with more experience? Why are you leaving your current position? What would your previous bosses say about you? Where do you see yourself 5 years from now? What are your salary expectations? And in general, like I said, if you get a question that you don't immediately know how to answer, don't panic. If nothing else, you want to show that you can do well under pressure. So try to remain calm and buy yourself some time by saying something like, that's a great question. There are a couple of examples that come to mind, so let me take a minute to think about what's the best one. And like I said, think about what they're really trying to learn from you so that you can select an example that reveals the aspect of your candidacy that they're really trying to understand. In the end, as you mentioned earlier, if there's a question that you honestly just don't have an answer for, be honest. And don't try to fake it or make something up that isn't true, but acknowledge that it's an important question and offer to share an example of something similar so that you can keep the conversation going and not sound like you didn't understand the question or that you're just dodging it, which could make them just want to push harder on this question. Okay, finally, I wanted to talk about the closing minutes of the interview, where the employer is evaluating your level of engagement and enthusiasm after the bulk of the formal interview has transpired. Your goal here is to finish strong, even though you may be tired, and create a final lasting impression that you are someone who is truly interested and a strong fit for the position. And this can be done by finishing with a high level of energy. It's reflected in your smile, a confident voice, and through your thoughtfully prepared questions, which give the impression that you're truly interested in obtaining and succeeding in the job. And finally, an explicit reiteration of your value proposition and why you were genuinely excited about the role. Let's talk about some of the best practices for having a great closing and finishing strong. First, make sure you reiterate that key sales message again. Again, repetition and directness helps the interviewer to remember you. Remind them again about why you're so interested in this particular job opportunity. And then make sure that you have multiple questions prepared for the interviewer. My clients often ask me what are the best types of questions to have at the end of an interview, and here are some guidelines. First, make sure you craft questions that show your genuine interest in the role and suggest that you're already thinking about being in the role and how to be successful in it. So questions like, if you could go back and give yourself a piece of advice when you first started in the role, what would it be? Or what do you think really differentiates the star performers from the good performers in this role? These questions show that you are really interested in the role and that you're already thinking ahead about how you might be successful. Good questions also can highlight your investment in research and knowledge about key aspects of the company and the job, and maybe your question is asking them to confirm a more nuanced aspect of something you've learned through your research. Lastly, make sure you're asking questions that are appropriate for the person's level and experience. In other words, the end of the interview is definitely an appropriate time to ask, when and how you should expect to hear about the next steps in the process. But, don't ask, someone who's junior in the company, what the next HR steps are. That's more appropriate for an HR representative or the hiring manager. And likewise, don't create an awkward situation by asking the HR representative, what's the strategic direction of the business, since they're not going to have a perspective on that. Lastly, you want to make sure that you gather all of your interviewer's contact information so you can send a timely and customized thank you email or a handwritten note. So let's take a moment to talk about how you continue to create the positive, lasting impression that you've made in the interview after the interview, because your actions after the interview are oftentimes just as important as your actions during the interview. As we said a moment ago, you'll want to send a customized thank you note to each of your interviewers. And by the way, this comes up sometimes, is if you're interviewed in a group or like multiple interviews at one time, like simultaneously, don't send a group thank you, tempting as that may be. It's like one of the pet peeves that most interviewers have is when they feel like you're taking a shortcut and not sort of individualizing your thank you note. Ideally send your thank you note within 24 hours of the interview, because even if things don't work out with this particular opportunity, you want to have set the stage for a future networking relationship if possible. Make sure you also keep any internal champions or advocates or contacts that you have within the company, like maybe somebody that you've been talking to that you know that works there that's kind of helped you prepare for the interview or giving you some information or insights. Make sure that you keep them posted on the interview, that you completed it, the positive impressions you had about the experience, since they may be in a position to relay back to the interviewers or the hiring manager your enthusiasm for the role. Next, for better or worse, while the experience is still fresh in your mind, take the time to evaluate your experience for future reference and for future interviews. You want to write down things like who did you speak with and what were the key points that you learned or that you gathered from them. What did you learn about the company and the position? Any follow-up actions you need or want to take, like maybe emailing an article you may have referenced in the interview that the interviewer expressed an interest in. Any references to the decision-making time frame that they said they would, that they would be working under, if that's applicable, and what's your overall assessment of the interview and how you would want to improve your performance in the future. Lastly, if you don't hear back from, the HR contact or whoever your contact is within the articulated time frame, you should absolutely feel comfortable to follow up, because that's what an enthusiastic and interested candidate would do. My clients often say like they're really concerned about coming across as like stalking them or being like too annoying. But remember that you not following up could just as easily be interpreted as you having lost interest in the opportunity because maybe you found a better opportunity, and you don't want them to have room for that interpretation. So again, it's perfectly acceptable to follow up as long as you're not coming across as being irritated or impatient.
And Michelle, quick question. Which
Yep.
do you think is the best way to go? Email thank you, handwritten thank you, or is either fine?
So great question. I think that in today's sort of electronic age, especially if you know that the process is they're going to be making decisions fairly quickly, I think email is certainly the preferred choice because it can get there most quickly. I think a handwritten note is nice if you feel like you particularly made you struck a real rapport, or you feel like you met someone who there was really a connection with. It just adds like a personal touch that I think is really nice. And so even if it comes 2 days later from your email response, I think that it just shows that you took the extra time and care and that you really enjoyed meeting that person. So I don't think you should feel pressure to do handwritten thank yous for every interview or every interviewer, but I do think that in those occasions where you feel like here's a person that even if this doesn't work out, I would genuinely like to continue to have a relationship or to have this person as a contact, I think a handwritten note can be very strategic and very appropriate in that situation.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure. So, once you're ready to start preparing and practicing for your interviews, I wanted to make sure that you tap into, some of the following resources. Certainly, ask friends or former colleagues, people, lots of people who have had interview experience, including yourself, to provide, you with a mock interview or constructive criticism on your performance. You can also contact the president or career chair of your local University of Chicago Alumni Club to see if they are or are planning on hosting an interview skills workshop series, as many of the local clubs do. As Annie mentioned earlier, I participated in some of the Philadelphia ones, and so there's a website link here you can access to see what your regional alumni club is offering. You can also consider contacting Annie to set up a mock interview and to get feedback. And certainly, if you're struggling in your preparation or you're experiencing like regular difficulty in getting past first-round interviews, then I would suggest that it's important to diagnose what is going wrong. And rather than just like keep banging your head against the wall, it may potentially be worth engaging a professional career coach to think about how you can improve your performance by identifying where the weaknesses might be and how you can actually improve those weaknesses. So in closing, I just want to leave you with these last thoughts, which is, preparation is critical. Know yourself, the company as much as possible before, and the interviewer before the interview. Create a compelling agenda of your key selling points that explicitly connects you to the role in the company. You never want the reason to be that you didn't get the next interview or the offer to be because the employer didn't have a clear sense of like who you were or what you could bring to the role. And while preparation is definitely essential, be careful that you don't sound like overly rehearsed or mechanical or robotic. I think that's always a danger, that if you over-practice and you're overly scripted, you sound like a robot. And authenticity is definitely more desirable than perfection. So get the key concepts out, but don't feel like you've got to script it to the to the word by to the specific word. Next, as we said before, control the controllable. In an interview process, details matter in terms of being on time, being dressed appropriately, how you treat others. You're being judged on all these dimensions, not just your interview responses. And since I know all of you are going to have prepared so effectively in terms of your agenda, you just want to make sure that, again, you're pushing that agenda proactively and you're not just being reactionary in the interview. And finally, I'll just say, the job search process can definitely be, sometimes it can feel like a marathon, and you want to adopt a long-term perspective. While you may not get the outcome or desire that you want with every interview, remember to be the consummate professional, because it's a small world out there, and you never know who knows who or who's going to move to a different company and could be a future interviewer or client of yours. And that means accepting good news with humility and, likewise rejection with, maturity, and recognizing that there's value in reflecting on any interview experience. So I know we've probably only got a few minutes, Annie, but I'm happy to take any additional questions if there are any.
Oh, there are questions. Don't you worry. Since we just talked about preparing for interviews, what if you are interviewing for a position that is not quite defined? A team is looking to add someone with a certain skill set, but they're not quite sure. So you're almost in an interview and a negotiation at the same time, and it's all vague and murky. Do you have thoughts on that?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a balancing act of two things. One is you want to try to draw out from them, what are the biggest problems that you're trying to solve? What are the, like if you had if you could have the dream candidate start tomorrow, like what are some of the biggest challenges and problems that you wish, could get addressed, yesterday? And because I think that understanding, showing that you want to focus on what their priorities are is going to be helpful. Then you can then craft your candidacy, or you can craft your responses to say, hey, well, let me tell you about some of the skills or experiences I've had that are either similar or that would allow me to help you address some of those specific problems or challenges. I think what you want to be careful about is that, even though they may present like, oh, here's some, problems or challenges or issues, is you don't want to what's the word? I guess you don't want to kind of go so far in a direction where you're promoting, yourself as someone who can do A, B, and C, and maybe like you really dislike C. Like if there's an aspect to this role that you would absolutely despise or really not enjoy, you want to be careful that you don't set yourself up to say, oh, here's something which I'd really love to be doing, when in fact it's not a strong suit or it's not something that you would enjoy doing. Because again, when it's murky like that, that can actually be a positive in that if you're the right candidate, there probably is some flexibility to define the role in a way that that suits what you're going to be best at and what you're going to enjoy most. So I'd say first try to uncover what are their biggest issues and what are their biggest challenges and how can you help with that, and just sort of overlay that with what are you going to be most interested in doing, and not sort of misrepresenting that you'd love to do something that you're actually going to be very unhappy doing.
Perfect. And I know that in that chart of some of the typical questions that you had, the weakness question was in there, but a couple of people were wondering if you could speak to that just very briefly. What is your advice? How authentic can you be? And even one question was, how specific can you get and how authentic can you be in terms of, can you say, one of my weaknesses is selling myself?
Okay, great question. So yeah,
I drew that out there with.
Yeah, I probably don't recommend that particular response. But so with the weakness question, I think that a couple of guidelines on that. One is don't pick a weakness that is like what I call like a fatal flaw, right? So if the job is like a highly quantitative or technical job, like don't say that one of your greatest weaknesses is that you have weak technical skills. Okay, so first and foremost, don't pick something that is like a requirement of the job. Second thing is, I think that it's often best to pick something that is related to your personality or related to your style. Maybe personality is not the right word, but something that's related to like a style or like a tendency that you have because of your personality. The reason I say that is because what happens is people go to like either extreme. They either pick something that's like a fundamental flaw that will hamper their ability to do the job, and that's not a good answer. You also don't want to pick something that's like so superficial that it doesn't feel like you're actually, it feels like you're dodging the question, right? But if you describe something that has to do with like, I'm the kind of person that tends to like to give a lot of detail in my instruction. Like I like lay things out like in a very detailed manner because I feel like that will be helpful to the listener or to the direct reports that I'm talking to. But I've learned in certain situations that is not always well received. Sometimes that has been perceived as I'm micromanaging or I'm overly instructing or that I don't trust the person that I'm talking to because I'm giving them such detailed instruction. And so I've had to learn that can sometimes not be an effective strategy. So I think talking about something that is like your tendency or something that you would naturally be inclined to do, but that you've learned doesn't always work, and how you're correcting that or how you're becoming more sensitive to identifying when that's appropriate or when it's not appropriate is a better answer because it sounds more authentic and real. I mean, it's something that's based on your personality and style, so it's not easily changed. It's not like I'll just start wearing red shirts instead of blue shirts, but it's also something which you can address, in a contextual situation as opposed to I have terrible communication skills. Like that's going to take a long time to fix. Does that help to answer the question?
It does. Quick question then, is it okay to take notes during an interview?
But to take notes during an interview, great question.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain interview questions, like for those that might be doing like consulting interviews, where they're actually going to ask you to work through a business problem. And in those situations, having paper and pencil and trying to take notes is fine. I think that unless it's like at the end of the interview or something where the person's mentioned like, oh, there's a really good book that I've read that I think really talks about this topic, or I wrote an article on this subject at some point, and you want to say, oh, would you mind if I take a piece of paper out and I'd love to just make a note of what this article is or what you're referring to write down, I think is fine. Or if they say, oh, at some point you should talk to Bob Jones in the such and such department about this, about this role because I think that might be an area that could be of interest to you, then I think it's fine to pull it out. But I wouldn't like automatically just pull out the notepad and start taking notes for the interview because that will be very distracting for the interviewer and make them feel like you're not engaged in the process because you're looking down, writing things on paper. So I'd have to hear like what's the reason you'd be doing this, but except in those few select cases, I don't think it's appropriate to take notes.
Great. And then last question, how do you manage stress during an interview?
That's a great question. I think I think it's about experimenting and figuring out what's going to work best for you. I think you have to figure out like what is the source of the stress, right? I mean, for some people it's, I've already gone through 10 interviews and been unsuccessful. Why does this keep happening to me? And is it going to happen to me again, in this 11th interview? And so, if it's something like that, you need to identify what's the source of the issue, right? Do you understand, is it a response that you keep giving or like an attribute that you keep conveying? So then maybe it's working with a professional coach or it's practicing with friends to make sure that you nail down the piece that keeps tripping you up. I also tell people that you want to have perspective, which is try to treat each interview that you go into as a clean slate. I mean, the person you're going to speak with each time has no idea if this is your first or your 100th interview. So, you're starting off, as far as they're concerned, this is the first interview you've had, and you've just started, the process. So, every day is like a fresh day. So, try to, again, sort of like, for some people it's taking deep breaths, it's doing a little bit of meditation or yoga beforehand, or doing like a workout before, the interview to kind of just get themselves in that clear slate of mind. But even those things that I mentioned, think about the source. I know for a lot of people it's like thinking a lot about like, oh my God, what if they ask me this, what if they ask me that, So prepare, but then a couple hours before the interview, stop preparing, because if you haven't figured it out by then, you're not going to, like 15 minutes before the interview, and just get there ahead of time. Have a cup of coffee or just relax. Don't stress. Don't create unnecessary stress by panicking because you're late or you can't find the office or the location. But I'd say that's something which get to the root cause of what is causing the stress and figure out how you can manage it. What messages can you tell yourself beforehand and during to help you manage it. But preparation is ultimately the best tool for that.
Well, fantastic. We have reached the end of our webinar, and I know there were a lot of questions still out there. So please, everyone, feel free to shoot me an email at anniewhite@uchicago.edu. I'll also send you an email tomorrow with a recording of this presentation, including the slide deck. So feel free to just go ahead and respond to that as well. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us. This was fantastic. We're already getting accolades that are coming in through the chat box saying that it was a great, informative, to the point, really helpful presentation. So I thank you so much for your time and your energy. And I wish everyone a very happy and safe holiday season, and I hope to see you back again for the webinar in January. Thanks,
Great.
everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Take care.